that's the equivalent with peptides. It's okay. It's, some people are like, it's just amino acids. It's like, well, but it's a specific combination of amino acids, which gives a specific biochemical instruction, which can be literally, life transforming if it gives the right instruction to the right part of your body in the right time, in the right way.
Hi, welcome to the Rejuvenate podcast, and I'm your host, Krissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are talking peptides. What are they, what they can do for you, and which ones are worth trying? So Elwin, tell me, peptides. Why this topic? Why today? Why are we talking peptides?
Great question, Krissy. Well, it's something I'm very passionate about. It's something that's made a huge difference in my life over the years, and especially over the last couple of years. And it's something that I see is becoming really trendy and really, like a lot of people are starting to get into it and wanting to learn about it. And the resources to learn about it, I would say, are fairly minimal. And that's partly, because they're new, and partly because it's previously, until very recently, it's only been in the area of a few scientists and a few medical people. So it, there hasn't been much demand for it until recently. But yeah, there's very few resources about it. So if there was just as much information about it as a lot of the other topics we're covering, I probably would have done peptides later in the sequence. But because I feel that there's this real need for some good, especially broad, holistic information, I find a lot of pieces here about this individual peptide or this individual outcome maybe, but I have yet to find like a really good broad overview in video form at least. And I'll recommend some resources. I would say there's one good book on the subject that is a good broad overview that I would recommend. But yeah, there's very little about it, and it's important. I also want to say the reason that I've chosen to cover it now is not because I sell them, nor because I recommend them. In fact, I will not recommend anywhere for you to get them other than to go to a medical professional. In some countries, like the country I'm in, it's not possible to go to a medical professional to have them prescribed to you. And so the only way you can get hold of them is to buy them from sites that offer them for research purposes. I have been willing to gamble and try these for myself, but I would not recommend you to do so. And I certainly cannot recommend who you should go to. I'm open to doing that if one of these companies contacts me and gives me a tour of the company and shows me all the documentation that they have and all the rest of it. But up until that point, I wouldn't feel comfortable recommending anyone. So this is really purely not self-promotion, but purely because, we want to help. This is straying into medical territory. So meaning that I'd say peptides are kind of on the border between supplements and medicine. They are often things that are naturally occurring within the body. And so it's, you could put them in the category of nutrition quite easily. But, and in fact, they are, as we'll talk about, things that are contained within common foods and stuff like that. So you could put them in the subject of nutrition. But on the other hand, because they have such powerful effects, they tend to be classed as medicine. And so because they are classed as medicine, I won't be recommending you should take this much. I also won't even be saying you should take this. I'm just going to talk about my own personal experience taking them and maybe some, my observation and feedback from the people around me. But I certainly will not be able to talk in this video in terms of you should do this, you shouldn't do that, because only a medical professional has the right to advise you in that way. So this is not, this is what you should do. This is, why don't you ask your doctor about X? Or why don't you find a doctor who knows about X so that then they can give this to you and help you with this. Peptides are also key to feeling younger. So we call the Rejuvenate podcast. We haven't really addressed why that's the case very much yet. But, we are helping to combat premature aging. We're not claiming that we can help you to live forever, but we are saying, look, if you're feeling a lot older than you actually are, then there's a reason for that. And so actually one of the theories about what causes that premature aging is a peptide deficiency, like your body can't make enough of its own peptide. So we'll get into that. Another theory as to what makes you feel older than you actually are, which I would say is a more substantiated and well-known and believed theory, of course, is that a less than optimal amount of hormones can also make you feel like you're not as young as you actually are. And so we've talked about hormones already, but peptides are a big part of that. And of course, as we talked about in the hormone episode, some peptides are also hormones. So there is some overlap. So in the hormone episode, I talked about a few peptides, which are very much in the hormone category. But with this, we're really going to talk about all the peptides and about all the different types, because there's Eastern peptides and Western peptides. There's bioregulator peptides versus more supplemental peptides. So we're going to talk about all the different types, what they do, why you might want to take them, and all the rest of it.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, because I'm really new to this space, so I'm really excited to travel down this road with you, because I know you've talked a lot about peptides, but I don't really have a lot of background around it. So can you take me to the absolute beginning? What are peptides? What are they in the body? All that kind of stuff. Give me a little bit of an education here.
Yeah, absolutely. So in a nutshell, what a peptide is very, very simply a chain of 2 or more amino acids up to a certain amount. Some people say, above a chain of 40 amino acids in a row, it's then called a polypeptide. Some people do not bother with that categorization. In fact, some of the most popular peptides are over 40, and they still refer to as just peptides rather than polypeptides. So what's the difference between a peptide and a protein? A protein is just like a really, really, really long chain. So if you think of an amino acid as like a letter, and they're quite similar. Like there are loads of amino acids, but in terms of the common ones, there is a similar amount of them as there are letters in the alphabet. And so we could think of a peptide as kind of like a word, or maybe, depending if it's a long one, a sentence, right? Whereas a protein is more like a whole book. Like it's got, loads and loads and loads of amino acids in a row. And so that's one of the struggles of digestion, is that your stomach, with its stomach acid, has to break down that huge, book worth of chain of amino acids into, pretty much individual amino acids, so that your body can actually assimilate them and use them properly. And often it struggles with that. And that's why people can end up with deficiency of protein. It's really deficiency in certain amino acids. So anyway, why are they becoming so popular? Because they work. And so when I say work, what do I mean? I just said there's like a protein, right? Well, here's the thing. So yes, they are in essence just the building blocks of protein, a few of them in a row in a specific sequence. But the key thing is, and the thing that makes them so magic, is that in that form, I just compared them to letters and words, and that was for a reason. Because they are kind of biochemical instructions. They tell what your organs, your glands, all the way down to the cells, and even, yes, down to the very DNA. They give an instruction to it to do something. And so, they can go all the way down to gene expression, especially the shorter peptides, the peptides that are just a few amino acids in a row. And there's still more investigation going on about this, more research. They're not quite sure if the longer peptides actually then break down into shorter peptides that then fit into the DNA. But these peptides that are the short ones, that are literally just a few amino acids, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, they can literally, it's actually hard to fathom how small an amino acid is, because I only kind of learned this a couple of years ago. Because if you buy, some kind of protein powder, you bought L-tyrosine before, or lysine, or one of these amino acids, you kind of think of them as maybe the size of a grain of sand, or maybe the size of a powder, but they're actually so small they can fit inside your DNA. That's how small an amino acid actually is. So when we talk about a sequence of, a few amino acids being a peptide, we're talking about something so incredibly tiny that only the most powerful microscopes are even able to measure it. And so this is, again, something that's partly why it's a fairly new technology compared to hormones, because the actual constituents of it are so small. And so we've only fairly recently, when I say recently, I mean the last few decades, got to a place with science and technology where we're actually able to synthesize any sequence of these different peptides. And so and just as the case that most collections of letters together are not words and don't do anything, similarly, most sequences of amino acids, if you just took a random collection of amino acids and joined them together, would it do anything in the body? Probably not. Just like if I took a random collection of, letters from the alphabet and put it together and said them to you, would it mean anything to you? Probably not, right? But if I take the correct combination of letters and said a word to you, that word can have a really profound impact on you, right? So that's the equivalent with peptides. It's okay, it's, some people are like, it's just amino acids. It's like, well, but it's a specific combination of amino acids which gives a specific biochemical instruction, which can be literally, life transforming if it gives the right instruction to the right part of your body in the right time in the right way.
That is really beautiful. I've got a quick clarifying question or asking just in this space, because I know we've talked about essential amino acids before when we were looking at my test results. I know I needed extra supplementation, which has been very helpful to me. So how do peptides relate if somebody is deficient or needing more supplementation in those essential amino acids, and then within the space of our bodies being able to make those peptides do they come from the essential amino acids? Tell me a little bit about that process and how these peptides that we're discussing today, how they fit in with that part.
Yeah, that's a good question. So this is still in the realm of, I'll give a little bit of speculation. I don't think this has been absolutely proven by research, but it's a reasonable assumption what I'm about to say. So first, just to explain that. So there are, depending on who you listen to, between 8 and 10 essential amino acids. And there are some that are also conditionally essential, a couple that are conditionally essential, depending on various circumstances. So what that means is all the other amino acids, your body can make them, and they often make them out of the essential ones. So the idea, as long as you have enough of the essential ones, your body can make enough of all of them. That's the idea. So if you do not have enough of the essential ones, the idea would go that then you may have a lack of some of the amino acids. And as you said, Krissy, that's exactly what showed up in your test results and shows up quite commonly in people, especially as they get older. I would say it's even mainstream science medicine, especially science and medicine, that especially as people get older, they're more likely to have a protein deficiency. It's a bit more of a concern. But why does that matter? Well, protein is actually the building block of most of our body, right? Like some areas, like the brain, especially has a lot of fat. Carbohydrate, although it's one of the main sources of fuel, that's not really what our body is made of. So most of our body is actually made out of protein. So it's the building block for everything. But what we're not sure about and what there needs to be more research on is if you don't have enough of those essential amino acids, if you don't have enough of those letters, that alphabet as it were, does that mean that your body cannot make enough words or instructions or peptides to then give to the cells, to give to the DNA, to keep them functioning optimally? I would say that's a reasonable assumption, as you say. So this could be one of the reasons why a protein deficiency, an amino acid deficiency, long-term can cause problems. It's partly because you don't have the building blocks for literally a lot of what your body is made out of, but it's also absolutely because you don't have the building blocks for the instructions that keep every cell, every organ, every strand of DNA functioning optimally. Does that make sense? Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that answered the question. Because I mean, in thinking about it, when they say that our bodies, we've got a whole new set of skin, or I'm going to get this so wrong, but essentially our bodies are constantly remaking themselves over a period or a process of years. So what I'm hearing you say is, then that's made from these amino acids, from these peptides, from all of that, correct?
Yeah, made from the amino acids, made from peptides to some degree, but peptides we're really more concerned about as biochemical instructions rather than building blocks per se. Yeah.
Perfect. So thank you, because this is a very big topic and very good. So going into this, so now that we know about these lovely peptides, how do we you say, it's on the new, the new verge, the next steps, if somebody decides to go down that route, what are the options? How would somebody take them?
So this is again where I say they're kind of bordering between supplements and medicine. Some people say they're the future of medicine. I want to talk about that a little bit at the end. I don't want to get distracted. I want to start off quite practical. But yeah, so we have oral, right, which is consuming, eating, supplement, whatever. This is generally not very effective. There are exceptions to that, and I'll share them as we go through. I plan to, list all the major peptides that, again, I've experience of.
Can you explain why that's not effective? I'm sure you probably will, but if you could just...
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about how one of the main jobs of the stomach, we talked about it a little bit here and in the digestive episode, that one of the main jobs of the stomach is to break down proteins into its constituent amino acids as small as possible so that then they can be absorbed by the body. So the problem with taking peptides orally is that the stomach acid is actually going to break them down. Even if that's not the case, even let's say you're like, oh, I'm all right in that regard. I absorb protein poorly. I have very low stomach acid. Okay. But then even in that case, if you were to add a peptide to a lot of other protein that you're consuming throughout the day, it's going to, the effect is going to be less, minimal, because it's diluted with all the other things. Now, there are a whole class of peptides, which we're going to talk about, where they don't have that perspective as strongly, where they actually do actively promote and sell oral versions, which is the bioregulator category. But even there, generally, if you look at the feedback from people, they say, they're not sure if it's as effective, they're not so sure if it's working. Whereas when people use peptides using the other methods we'll talk about, generally it is much more effective. As I say, there are exceptions, but this is not something you have to believe me or any expert about. You can test, as I have done, but basically when you use them orally, it's like basically with a lot of supplements. You're like, is it doing anything? I don't know. Whereas when you use them with the other methods, within a few minutes, hours, days, depending on their mode of action, you're like, oh wow, this is really doing something. So that, oh wow, this is really doing something response, I personally, at least the short-term one, not like reflecting back a year later, but, as I say, fairly instant. That's not something I personally have ever experienced taking them orally, probably for the reason I said, right? Because your body just breaks them down with the stomach acid. So the other types are nasal, intranasal. So that's getting a little, like a Sudafed bottle, not that I recommend Sudafed, spraying it up your nose. Why does that work? Because, those mucous membranes, it could go straight into the bloodstream. And interestingly, like intranasal, because there are, mucous membranes in other places, but intranasal means it can get straight into the brain. Because otherwise there's this blood-brain barrier. So there are certain things that we'll talk about, like epitalon or Cmax, where you especially want them to have an effect on the brain. And so in that case, there's an argument to be made that it's actually more effective to do it that way than the other way. Although the one I'll list at the end is usually the most effective way. Then there's transdermal. So this is through the skin. Now, again, with the bioregulators, there is the company, there's only one really main company that produces them, and they do have a whole range now where all of them are transdermal, so they claim that all of them can work transdermally. But for the other type, the Western type of peptides, the supplemental peptides, very few of them are used transdermally. There is a few, but out of the ones that are really popular, the only one is GHK GHK copper. So that one seems to work well for reasons we'll talk about, but again, not very good. So that leaves us with the last option, which is not very popular with anyone, but it does seem to be the thing that actually works, and that's through injection. And so, as I said, some people are terrified of needles. This is a major thing that will stop them trying it, and that's absolutely fine. It's not like everyone has to do this. And as I said, in many cases, there are other ways. The intranasal works quite well in quite a few cases, but some of the most popular peptides, like the growth hormone ones and the immune system supporting ones, only really work significantly well if they're used via injection. And so, and this is, and so that's a choice, whether that's something you want to go into. Before I got into peptides, I'd never injected anything in my whole life. I still have never injected anything other than that. It's not the difficult kind of injection. It's if you choose to use it, then your doctor will guide you to use insulin needles. And so these are extremely thin, extremely nothing like the ones that they put in your veins if they're trying to draw blood. Nothing like that. Just incredibly thin needles, and you can basically usually they tell you to use them subcutaneously. So subcutaneously means just underneath the skin where there is fat. So usually they do it in the belly, just like you would with insulin. And remember, insulin, as we talked about in the hormone episode, is simply a peptide, right? That is the peptide that allows blood to be taken out of your that allows sugar to be taken out of your bloodstream before it builds up to dangerous level and put into the cells and the muscles where your body actually needs it. So, unsurprisingly, that insulin is the most popular and sold peptide in the world, has been for a long time. So that method of delivery that works for insulin works for really almost all the peptides, and arguably it works better. If nothing else, it's better value for money. So in the case of some peptides where intranasal does work, the calculation is usually like it will be maybe half as effective if you use it intranasally. So obviously if you're scared of needles or you don't want to use needles for whatever reason, which is totally understandable, then you can in many cases do it intranasally, but you're going to get half as much for your money. So that's always going to be an issue as well. Just remind me to, as we go through them, if it's ever not clear, like what versions are available and what tend to work best. Again, I'm not going to recommend anything. That's not my place. I'll only share my experience.
No, that's really good. It's nice to know that there are options because, not everybody is, fine with a little self-injection. But you mentioned one point, which I know sometimes for me, I find a little confusing, whether something's a peptide, whether something's a hormone, what it is, but sometimes they can be both. So could you just kind of clarify that bit a little for me?
Sure. I tried to clarify this a bit in the hormone thing, but it is tricky. So basically, a peptide is a chain of amino acids, like we talked about earlier. So a hormone is something that has a biological impact, often on the whole body, but specifically related to the glands, and is always produced in a gland. So generally, to simplify, there's two categories of hormones. So there's steroid hormones, and they're the ones that are built basically out of cholesterol. And that is mainly the adrenal hormones like cortisol and aldosterone and some of the others, DHEA. And then there is testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, and all the rest of it. They're built out of cholesterol. But the rest of the hormones generally are actually built out of amino acids. Some of them, like thyroxine that we talked about before, are also not peptides. Thyroxine is a combination of one amino acid, tyrosine, with a bunch of iodine attached to it, 3 or 4 iodine molecules attached to it. So maybe I'm getting overcomplicated. To simplify, basically, the fundamental building block of a hormone is going to either be a cholesterol or it's going to be an amino acid. And even if it's an amino acid, it is sometimes a peptide and sometimes not, depending.
That was really good. Thank you. I know.
Simple version.
It's like, yeah. There's so much information here in this, and yeah, it's just getting clear. And the more I hear it, and the more we are able to share it, then there's just more clarity, which is exactly what we're wanting to provide, is the information, so people have the best knowledge to move forth to ask the questions, and have as much in their arsenal of understanding as possible. You did mention. Going back into the peptides, you did mention bioregulators. What are the types of peptides that are out there that are available? Okay,
that's a good question. And this is my classification. The way that I'm going to classify them is my classification, but it's generally agreed upon by most people. It's just the terminology that I'm about to use. So bioregulator is a type of peptides coming from Russia, basically. So normally when we talk about Eastern, we're talking about places like China and Korea and stuff like that, but they actually have a Russian origin. And so I thought it was interesting. Like the biggest book that I've personally seen that talks about peptides is Tony Robbins' new book. Big as in, I'm assuming that it's had millions of readers. And when he introduces peptides, he basically talks about the person who discovered bioregulators and like their whole journey. And then when he actually lists the peptides, he only lists the other type, and there's not an overlap. So, and I'm sure that's not his fault. I imagine that some editor's gone in there and gone, oh, that's unnecessary information, and simplified it all. But I just wanted to clear this up. So, the original, and I'll simplify this because I know we've got tons to cover. But the original discovery of peptides actually comes from a guy called Pavlov, who a lot of people have heard of, because he's the guy with the dogs, right? He's the guy who discovered this thing about conditioning, where if you ring a bell every time you feed dogs, eventually you just ring the bell and they'll start salivating. So that guy, but he also discovered the first peptides. And so now his work has been taken over by a guy called Dr. Cavinson. Cavinson is still around, pretty old by now, but still active, still working, always a good sign. He's rumored to be the personal physician of Vladimir Putin. Don't know if that's true, but there's certainly photographs of them together. He has an institute in Russia. A lot of people fly there from around the world to get, various different kinds of treatments. They claim to be able to reverse all kinds of incurable diseases. I personally have had no experience of going there, of having any communication with them. I can't speak to that, whether there's any validity to that or not, but just to give you the background. So where does their system come from? So the story is this. So obviously Russia during the middle of the last century was communist, right? And so they had a very different system from ours. Better? Probably not, but different, right? And there were some advantages to their system over ours. And one of them is that, they weren't purely profit motivated. So goes the story, right? So obviously there was this Cold War, there was this massive conflict with Western powers. And so a lot of that was based on this nuclear power, right? And so they would have these nuclear submarines. Again, the story goes, I don't want to be accused of impugning anyone, but they had less safety concerns, let's just say, or less safety protocols than the Western powers. And so, the sailors would be in these submarines with this nuclear material for a long time. Maybe it wasn't as shielded, it wasn't in Western submarines, whatever. And so a lot of these sailors, when they got back after these stints of, months in this nuclear submarine, they would have massively prematurely aged, right? They were like really the worst for wear. Not outright radiation damage, but like really, really premature age nonetheless. And so, again, because it's a communist country, they were like, throw as much money as this, but especially people at this as possible, work out a solution. How can we keep these soldiers young? How can we stop them being prematurely aged? And how can we also reverse the premature aging? So that's where the inception of this came from. And the direction that these Russian scientists went down is ended up being peptides. So and the glands as well, which we talked about the importance of the glands in the hormone episode. So what they've noticed especially is that a key part of this premature aging was the withering away or calcification of the pineal and the thymus. And so they identified those particular glands, pineal being, again, near the center of the brain, the thing that creates melatonin, serotonin, also DMT, maybe some other stuff going on with it, but basically regulates the sleep-wake cycle. That's the mainstream science around it. And then the thymus, which is one of the most important parts of the immune system, if not the most important part. And it was well known anyway that, the thymus is like nice and strong and healthy and vigorous in young people. And then it kind of really goes downhill, especially around 30-ish, if not way before. But so that was already known. And then the ditto pineal, it slowly calcifies. So this is an issue. But they targeted that. And so they came up with this theory that perhaps it is a lack of, in fact, no, let me go backwards. So they started off with this idea, which goes back thousands of years, probably, maybe even hundreds of thousands of years to, maybe shamanic cultures, stuff like that, of if there is a problem with an organal gland, just eat more of the organal gland for an animal, right? And so and this is not such a crazy idea. I think we touched on it in the hormone episode, and we will certainly more when we do get into thyroid, that the realization that the thyroid is so important in the Western world came from the end of the 1800s, where, again, medical doctors, research scientists, had this epidemic of people with thyroid symptoms, and they just started feeding them thyroid hormone. Apparently, literally, to begin with, it wasn't capsule. They would get people to put like raw thyroid hormone in a sandwich, go figure. And apparently people didn't love doing that on a daily basis.
But yeah.
Yeah. So apparently this was not super popular taste-wise. There wasn't, huge compliance, which is why they ended up doing it in capsules. But yeah, so basically, this is not such a crazy idea, right? So, in the West, we did that with the thyroid. in Russia, they noticed that these glands especially were suffering, flagging. Let's give them some pineal gland. Let's give them some thymus gland, right? And then they noticed that had some degree of effectiveness. And then they started looking into, what is it in the pineal or the thymus gland? What is it that, manages to make it through, as we said, the digestive tract? That's not particularly easy always. What is it that actually makes these people feel somewhat better? And so they narrowed it down eventually to peptides. And so that's one of the classes of peptides that still exist in the bioregulator world is, I think they're called cytomaxes. So these are refined, processed, like extracted from animal glands still. So that's one type of bioregulator peptide. They also now have another type of, again, as I said, the technology to synthesize any sequence of amino acids hasn't existed for that long, only for a few decades and at a reasonable cost, really not very long at all. But these days, they also have synthetic cytogens. I think that's the right way around, peptides. So from that basic concept, so a couple of things came. First of all, this idea that for any organ, gland, or system in the body, that if it has enough of the peptides that keep it healthy, that you can keep it youthful and healthy, and that you can even regenerate youth and health should it have declined, if you give it enough of the bioregulator peptide, which it is lacking. The second, the second concept being that of the bioregulator itself. So if you think about insulin as a classic example of the Western type of peptide, insulin says your gland, your pancreas, is not creating enough of the thing that it needs to keep you alive, to clear the sugar out of the bloodstream and put it where it needs to go. So therefore, we will give you insulin, the thing that you are not making enough of. The benefit of that to the person who has that issue is, of course, immediate, right? It's literally life-saving. It's fantastic. But this Eastern system said, well, rather than giving you the thing that your gland isn't making enough of, in this case, a peptide, why don't we give you the peptide which will help your gland to repair itself until it can make enough of its own? And sure enough, like in the case of insulin, that there is a bioregulator peptide called pancreatin, which claims to do exactly that. Now, I say claims. We'll get into a little bit more about how reliable this is. But as I said, Tony Robbins talked about it in his book, this type of peptide. So I wanted it. I didn't want to leave it out of a discussion about peptides. These are definitely less well known than the other type, which I'll spend the majority of the episode talking about. But I wanted to cover these first. So their presupposition is every system in the body, and they've got something for everything. They got Christogen and Velon for the immune system, thymulin for the thymus, pinealon and epitalon for the pineal. Epitalon is one of the only ones that has made it over to the West in any significant quantity, because there is so much research to show that it helps to regenerate the pineal that it's convincing enough that a lot of the Western scientific establishment has taken it on. There's cardiogen for the heart, thyrogen for the thyroid, ovigen and livergen for the liver, conlutin and bronchogen for the lungs, or technically bronchogen is for the bronchioles, vesolute for the veins, arteries, cartilax for the joints, prostamax for the prostate, testogen for the testicles. And believe it or not, that's not a complete list. That's just what I wrote down, again, that I have experience with. But yeah, there's like a huge list. So basically, they got one for the muscles as well. Any system, organ, gland of the body. For the eyes, they claim to be, there's a lot of people who go, again, to that clinic. If they have eye problems specifically, they claim to be able to regenerate the eyes and eyesight better than anyone else. And there's a lot of people who believe them, and a lot of people who say that, it helped to restore their sight, which is really interesting. Of course, going back to that initial principle of that, our ancestral culture, because now with the paleo movement, ancestral movement, there's a lot more focus on this, the importance of eating liver. And it's like, why is it a good idea to eat these organs and glands if it is? And so they may well have provided an answer for that. Now, the challenge, of course, is if you just eat Now, in the case of thyroid, like if you eat a live thyroid, like we talked about, the thing that's going to make you feel better is probably that it contains the actual hormone, the T3 and the T4, if that's what you're lacking, right? But what they would say is even if you remove the T3 and T4, and generally any thyroid glandular that you buy in the US, it should have had it removed because it's classed as a drug. So even if you remove that, people have still found, and this is not like totally mainstream, but a lot of naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors, all the rest have found if people take a thyroid glandular over a long time, it helps their thyroid to work better, but they don't really know why. So this is a possible explanation as to why. Why does eating loads of liver help your liver work better? Why does eating loads of thyroid help your thyroid work better? Because it gives you the peptides. Now, notice I just said loads there, and this is because, so first of all, it contains a lot of other stuff, right? So this is what the supplements that Dr. Cavinson's company, I don't know if it's a company, a foundation, whatever, but that group that they produce, as I said, they produce oral supplements, sublingual, transdermal. Critics of that do say that most of the research that shows how miraculous the results of these bioregulator peptides are done using injectables, or at least some. Often they'll give you a combination, injectables every day, plus ingestibles, like a combination. But there's not a huge amount of research in bioregulators that shows miraculous results without an injectable component. So that's part of the criticism, that they're selling these oral supplements. They're not cheap. That's the other thing. Are they anywhere near as expensive as, getting any of these diseases, especially if you don't have free healthcare? Certainly not. It's all relative. But compared to supplements, in most countries in the world, they're not cheap. Compared to drugs or medical treatment, they are, of course, cheap. So it depends on how you look at it. And the other thing is, because they're lumped in the peptide category, they're not as immediate. Let's assume that they work at all, and there is plenty of research which indicate that they do. Some of them do work to some degree, maybe a lot, maybe a miraculous degree, but it's not overnight. So there are studies that show that, especially the combination of epitalon and thymolin, which is the pineal and the thymus bioregulators, has massively reduced the incidence of death among the 60 to 80 age range, significantly. So very compelling evidence that it would significantly increase lifespan. But that's, you would have to keep, and it's not something you have to take every day. A lot of the time they do courses, 20 days on every 6 months, something like that. But still, you have to take them for years and years and years to then get those kind of results. That's often the case. So
yeah, I was going to ask, if somebody was taking these, how would they know that they're actually working? What would results be quite instant? Would it be, long term? Yeah,
no.
So I'm glad you're touching on this subject.
Not instant because of the very nature that they claim they work, right? The way that they claim they work is to rejuvenate. So again, very important with the name of this podcast, is to rejuvenate an organ, gland, or system, like the muscular system, the cardiovascular system, whatever, right? So these things cannot get rejuvenated overnight. So this is part of the issue, is that you will feel better generally with a Western peptide because that's giving you the thing that your organ and gland is not producing enough of, or not getting enough of, or both. So you're definitely more likely to feel significantly better with that. But when you take a bioregulator, it's always going to take time. So I have quite enthusiastically used a bunch of them, the cytogens. But I will say, the only area that I have an issue with that's bad enough to be classified as medical is the thyroid. And after taking 6 months of bioregulator, it didn't have a significant impact. But then again, that's one of the few bioregulators that there's not an injectable version available. The only type of that available is the oral supplement form. And so because of that, I don't know if that's, actually also transdermal, I think, but the injectable isn't available. So I don't know if that's quite a fair test, but again, it does indicate to me that if you have a major medical issue, that only taking the other bioregulator peptides without the injectable form. And again, I wish this weren't the case. This is not something that I relish recommending, because I know it will make me unpopular. People don't want to hear this. But it's just reality, unfortunately, that if you want the really shocking, oh my God, miraculous kind of effects, that usually you have to, get it into the bloodstream because the digestive system does just break it down. There are exceptions to that, which we'll talk about.
Wonderful, Elwin. Yeah, it's a whole new world opening up. Yes, no, it's fantastic. Thank you. So what, you discussed the bioregulator peptides, excuse me. What are some of the supplemental peptides that are out there?
Yeah, so this is my word, supplemental peptides. I think some in the peptide world might disagree with this because they don't want peptides lumped as supplements. They see it more as medicine. And that makes sense, right? I mean, generally, if you associate like the difference between a supplement and a drug, and I asked you what works better, what has a more immediate effect, pretty much everyone would say a drug, right? Or a medication. So they don't want a class in that. So I'm calling it supplemental, not to lump it in with supplements like omega-3 or whatever, but because of that distinction that I just made with versus the bioregulators. So the idea of a bioregulator is rejuvenate the organ gland system, whereas the idea with the quote-unquote Western peptides, so what I call supplemental peptides, is that it's giving your body more of what it's not making enough of. And that's a lot of the case, or they're actually artificial peptides, so something that your body never makes, but or it's a modified version of something that your body makes, but which has a specific effect. So some of the most popular peptides, in fact, are in that category. They are not ones that naturally already exist in your body, but they are obviously highly effective because they act on your body in a certain way.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. Perfect. Thank you so much. And then you're talking about, that they're not as necessarily what the body makes. How are these peptides, these supplemental peptides, your word that you're using, how are they made? How does our body take it in? I mean, does it matter that whether it's something that our body makes or it doesn't make? I mean, what's the difference within that sphere of this whole peptide, of all these peptides?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that's, again, not settled science. This is a lot of the thing about peptides. It's generally considered that the peptides that are natural and pre-existing in your body are safer, right? And this is the other thing that I would say about Western peptides. So the good thing about all the bioregulator peptides is that they all have, it seems anyway, unless all the research around it is fundamentally false and you don't want to believe it because of where it's coming from, but it seems that they are all extremely safe. And of course, especially the oral version, right? And now, of course, anything can be unsafe if it's improperly made. I'm not talking about that, or if it's from an unreliable source, but I'm saying properly made from a reliable source, all the bioregulator peptides seem to be extremely safe, probably for that reason. Oh, the other thing I didn't mention about the bioregulator peptides is, with very little exceptions, they're all either a chain of 2 and usually 3 or 4 amino acids. So they're all very small as well. And so they all have that capacity to slot right into the DNA that we talked about earlier. So the Western ones tend to be longer. They tend to be a lot longer. And so, as I said, there's still speculation about whether the body then breaks the long peptides into shorter fragments to then still be a similar size to the bioregulators and have an impact. There is certainly evidence for that. Like, there's a few that I'll talk about on my list here where There are small fractions of a longer chain that are sold separately and have their own specific uses. So there is definitely indications of that. But yeah, so that is definitely an issue with the supplemental peptides and this is pretty much always universally the case of any substance, that the more noticeable and dramatic the effect, the more dangerous it potentially is as well, especially if not used correctly, right? If you use too much, if you use it at the wrong time, the wrong way, and all the rest of it. And so again, everything I said about medical supervision, it's debatable if that applies to the bioregulators, especially the oral ones, right? You could probably actually just go on the internet, so long as you find a trustworthy source, you could probably self-administer. They are classed as supplements, is my understanding, in Western countries. But the Western supplemental peptides are definitely a case of you accidentally take 10 times as much or something, it could be a major problem, right? So this is something where you want to be very careful, to have professional supervision and all the rest of it. So that's a big issue. So they're becoming hugely popular. I would say the first thing I found out about, and I think this is still the most popular kind of use for them, is in the world of recovery with sports, because they seem to have a dramatic effect with that. So I think, I heard Joe Rogan and a bunch of those kind of people talk about it, how maybe an injury that might take 6 to 8 weeks to heal is better in like 1 to 2 weeks. Now in the sports world, athletic world, peak performance world, whatever you want to call it, that's bodybuilding world as well. That's almost unheard of, right? That's shocking. And for those people to whom that's their life, that's their livelihood, that's their reason for living, in some cases, and then, they can't do it for 2 months because of this injury, if they can cut that down, that's a huge thing, right? So this is one of the ways it's come into the public consciousness, is because a lot of people look up to sports stars and athletes and stuff like that. And so a few of those are talking about it and popularizing it. The other thing, which is not as, there are not as many people talking about, hey, I'm using it, but which is still gaining, I think, a lot of traction, is like celebrities, models, people who need to look good, people who need to look young. They want to reduce their body fat. They want to make their skin look younger. Whatever it might be. And so that's the other big contingent of people that are using it, I would say. And then probably third category where it's gaining traction is among the alternative medicine world, right? So definitely some medical doctors, in fact, most of the people who I've learned about this category of health from are medical doctors, but I would say from what I've seen, it's more popular among naturopathic doctors, functional medicine doctors, nutritionists, those kind of people. And, to address all kinds of issues that nothing else addresses. So I first came across it actually in the sphere of mold toxicity, which, like some heavy metal toxicity, so I had lead toxicity, which is very, very difficult to deal with. And I had mold toxicity, which is also pretty difficult to deal with, especially if you have a certain genetic variant. And that's, one of the things in our genetic insights test. I don't think at the time of recording this we offer that, but it's coming. So whether you have that issue, in fact, with both of those things, with lead, with different heavy metals, or with mold. So anyway, always a problem. Mold is always toxic. Heavy metals are always toxic, but some people especially struggle to deal with them. And so that's, 2 examples. And then it's huge as well in the digestive health space. There's so many people who have SIBO, SIFO, these kind of issues, allergies. And so with all those things, a lot of practitioners, I think, and I can relate to this, got to a point of feeling like I've literally tried everything in my repertoire and it's not working, or it's not working enough. And a lot of the challenges when people have issues with heavy metals, when they have issues with Lyme disease as well, when they have issues with mold, is that they react to almost everything negatively. The immune system is so overstimulated in a bad way. One of the terms for mold toxicity, I think, is called is it something like chronic immune activation syndrome, something like that. Chronic immune reactivity syndrome, something like that. So the other category I would say is, and this is really where I came into it, this is the perspective that made me interested in it initially, is how to calm down the immune system so it doesn't react to everything that you try and give the person to help them, right? Because if you have a certain situation, they react to almost every supplement, every herb, almost every food, like it's crazy, and so it's really difficult to help that person. If you're a naturopath, or if you're a herbalist, if you're a nutritionist, you're trying to give them all the nutrients, the herbs, whatever that you're used to giving them, they react to everything. Like, what the hell do I do? Yeah. So I think that's one of the other places where peptides have become popular as well, is through that ability to calm down inflammation. The same healing thing which helps athletes give those stories about, it used to take me 8 weeks to recover, now it's only 2, that kind of thing. That immense capacity to heal and regenerate and rejuvenate, say a joint that's been damaged, also seems to work very well with the lining of the gut. A lot of people have leaky gut, they have, irritable bowel syndrome, maybe that kind of thing, right? Where the gut is like chronically inflamed. So there's a lot of evidence and a lot of people who found it to be really effective for that as well. So those are the 3 big ones that I see as to why people get interested in peptides.
I've got a quick question
Sure.
Going into that space. And, maybe you've already talked about it or answered it a little bit, but when somebody is in that space of extreme immune system agitation, where it's just constantly, like you're saying, they're constantly reacting, and then they do take some of these peptides, how do the peptides act upon the body to help get the person out of that faster? What's the mechanism? What's the action?
Well, that's a good question. And it actually reminds me, as a side note, I was going to say this earlier and then I didn't get to it. So go back to answering your natural versus unnatural peptides question first. Those people who are quite reactive to things, so if you are the kind of person that tends to react to a lot of stuff, herbs, foods, allergens in the air, whatever, you're more likely, and I would say much more likely, to react negatively to the unnatural peptides than the natural peptides. So all the bioregulators should be fine. They're all naturally occurring. But for instance, taking some of the immune system peptides, and this is, from personal experience, thymosin alpha-1, thymosin beta-4, they're some of the main immune system peptides that your thymus should be making itself in optimal quantities, but usually isn't, especially once you get older. Zero reaction to that. But if you take, say, some of the growth hormone stimulating peptides, and then growth hormone stimulating hormone as well, like ipamorelin, tesamorelin, CJC, 1295, these kind of things, people often have a reaction to it. Now, the reaction is not necessarily dramatic. It's usually just like a bit of irritation and inflammation around the injection site, because those have to be injected. But again, what did I just say? Inflammation, right? So what is inflammation? I always want to hammer this home into people. It's not this nebulous thing that just causes disease. It is an immune system reaction. Inflammation is an immune system reaction. So now go back to answer your latest question, Krissy. How does it help to mitigate and reduce an immune system reaction? It does that so when you have we need to get into this more. We need to do a whole episode on the immune system. But again, in a nutshell, there's a lot of constituents of your immune system which are pro-inflammatory, and then there's a bunch that are also regulatory. And so we could call that anti-inflammatory. So they kind of stop so pro-inflammatory ones and also pro-oxidative parts of the immune system have a job to do that's super important of dealing with pathogenic organisms, or in fact, any foreign invaders, even just, inert substances. Like, they're there to deal with that. So the other thing to understand is that you have the innate immune system and then you have the adaptive immune system. So the innate immune system is this initial response to an invader, and it's very generalized. It's like, we have no idea what this is. This is also what happens if you burn yourself, if you cut yourself, if you breathe in some kind of pathogen in an amount that alarms or you eat it, whatever. Your body goes into this emergency reaction mode, which we refer to as inflammation. This is like the cytokine thing that you may have heard about in the news and stuff like that. And then the idea is, after a while, usually, especially about 7, 10, 14 days, something like that, the adaptive immune system kicks in. And so the idea of the adaptive is, by then your immune system has worked out what's going on and it's got an antibody to deal with it. Now, that's specifically in the case of, obviously, a new pathogen. If it's a pathogen that's encountered before, the adaptive immune system should already be ready and it can deal with it much quickly. If it is, an invader, because if you cut yourself with a knife, that's an invader, but it's not necessarily a pathogen, right? If you burn yourself, that's an invasion of heat, but it's not necessarily a pathogen. And so, but still, there's that initial inflammatory response, and then there's the, okay, we know what's going on, we'll deal with it specifically response. And so the thing that calms down that inflammatory response is the regulatory parts of the immune system. Now, it seems to be the case, for reasons that aren't entirely clear still, although there's plenty of theories about it, that when the immune system is not functioning correctly, when the thymus is, withered away compared to when it was when we were young, when the bone marrow is not functioning optimally, when the spleen isn't functioning optimally, those are the main parts of the immune system, then the regulatory parts of the immune system are underactive and the inflammatory parts are overactive. And so by using some of the immune system peptides, it basically gives the signal to the relevant systems to bring those back into balance. That's the simple way of putting it. The reality is the immune system is incredibly complicated. So if you're an immunologist, I know that was such an oversimplification that you might actually object to it. But that's basically it, right? Taking the peptides that your body doesn't have enough of, the whole immune system starts working better. As a consequence of the whole immune system working better, there is a correct balance between inflammatory and regulatory, and therefore it will stop the chronic inflammation. Not necessarily the immediate inflammation, because the immediate inflammation is a good thing. The inflammation we get when we stub our toe, when we burn ourselves, or when we, first breathe in a new virus or whatever, is necessary and healthy and right, but it shouldn't go on and on and on. And that's the issue of people who have chronic inflammation. We talked about gut issues. That was the thing that prompted the question. That is something that goes on for years and decades. And so that's a problem. That's something where the immune system isn't working correctly. Even if the cause of the chronic inflammation, say in the digestive system, is in fact chronic infection, which is more recently in the last decade speculated, actually, maybe it's quite often SIBO or SIFO. Even in that case, it's like that elevated inflammatory response isn't really helping. What we need is an adequate level of adaptive immune response to go, okay, what is this organism? How do we deal with it? And so the chronic inflammation just gets in the way. It doesn't help. It's a bit like, within the human personality, like the emotion of anger, which, Eastern medicine would actually correlate it with. If you take someone who's incapable of anger, they're much more likely to be bullied, picked on, taken advantage of, and all the rest of it. But if you take someone who's basically angry all the time, like they often create more problems for themselves than they prevent, right? And so this is a similar idea with the inflammation. It's healthy. It's a healthy response in certain situations, just like anger is. But if you're angry all the time, it's a problem. If you're inflamed all the time, it's a problem. So yeah, to basically, even though they're not called bioregulators, all these immune system peptides, they still go in and kind of regulate the immune system and get it back on track, to answer your question.
Thank you. So going into that, do you have a list like you had before with the other ones, a list of these other peptides that people would potentially be looking at or looking up to gain more knowledge about?
Yeah, and I'll categorize them by like why you might want to take them, even though a lot of them do a lot of things, right? Now, they've tried to make peptides more drug-like in the sense of, that's one of the things about a drug is that they try and make it only have one, if they can, only one mechanism of action, only one action, so they can really isolate it because it's better for, doing double-blind placebo trials and the rest of it. But of course, peptides, especially the long ones that actually exist in your body, they do loads and loads of different things. So their application is actually extremely broad. We already kind of talked about the immune system. I'll just give another example. So when I looked into the fact that I had lead toxicity, which is the other major issue I had that, in a category that was bad enough it would be classed as medical. The basic bottom line of it was there's nothing we can do. If it was slightly higher, then we put you on EDTA, which is this very harsh and not great form of chelation therapy where it basically like binds to the lead and transports it out. But the whole problem is that your body can't differentiate between lead and other important minerals like calcium. So EDTA also flushes calcium, magnesium, and zinc, and a bunch of other minerals that you actually need out of your system. So it's not great. So then I looked into it, and I'm the kind of person who can never accept that there's nothing you can do. And eventually, so I wasn't looking for peptides, I was just looking at what can you do to more quickly and safely get lead out of your body? Because the prevailing wisdom is like, there's nothing you can do. Now, I say prevailing wisdom, I mean scientifically. I know people say infrared saunas work and cilantro and all the rest of it, but there's not really science behind that. So I wanted to get some real science behind it. And it turned out that one of the peptides, that there is a peptide that your body will bind to lead to transport it out of the body as safely as possible. And it's thymosin beta 4. It's the same immune system peptide. So just to talk about the immune system once quickly before we go to the next topic. So there's thymosin alpha 1, thymosin beta 4, and thymolin. They all do a million things, but generally, why would you go for one or the other? Thymosin alpha 1 is the one that's usually used, especially to try and deal with an illness, although it's always better to not wait until you get ill. But it's the one you would do if you're going to do any, and really to prevent it, you know? So if you knew you were going into a situation, let's say, you know, you're going to your family and you know that they've got colds, that's the one you would take before you go there, you know, and every day, like as a preventative measure. So that's really, even though it does everything and it absolutely can and does increase the regulation and reduce inflammation, it's mainly to support the adaptive immune system to be more effective at dealing with pathogens, I would say. That's more what it's used for. Thymosin beta 4 tends to be used more for getting the immune system back into balance. And thymolin 2. Now, thymosin beta 4 is also often used for healing and repair and recovery for the same reason we just talked about. I won't go into it again, because often the issue with injuries is that inflammation sticks around way longer than you want it to. So that's one of the primary mechanisms whereby people recover so quickly, is it just gets rid of the inflammation so quickly. And then there is a specific fraction of thymosin beta 4 referred to as TB500 usually, although the technical name is TB4 fragment 17 to 23. Basically, you got this long list of amino acids, and it's like the middle bit, like a bit from the middle. It's often referred to as TB500. Now, confusingly, sometimes TB4, which is the long chain, is sold as TB500. So it's totally confusing. So this is not so much an issue if you deal with a doctor, which is probably what's recommended, right? And if you can, it is what's recommended. But if you are looking for it yourself, just like be aware of that distinction. And so this TB500, this bit from the middle of the TB4, is the specific bit that seems to be good for specifically lowering inflammation. And that's why that fragment is often taken out of it and used specifically. And there is also, even though the cost of each is similar, if all you want is to reduce inflammation, there's the idea of, well, because it's so much smaller fragment, you get a lot more per 1 milligram than you would of the whole molecule. So if you're specifically trying to go for reducing inflammation, then you would go for TB500 or TB4 frag 17 to 23 if you want to be specific. The other thing that's really huge for recovery is BPC 157. And this is a really interesting one. This is one of the only ones that it would make sense to take orally, even though most people actually still don't, because it was actually discovered in the stomach. So it's something that is produced in your stomach, and it's basically this compound that helps with healing and regeneration more than anything else. So whereas the TB500 part of the typical formula is to reduce inflammation, the BPC 157 is to literally support the body in healing and repair. And so it's interesting that it's actually made in the stomach. So if you think about it, every time the stomach empties out into the intestines via the duodenum, the whole process we talked about in the first episode, technically there should be some BP 157 being created by the stomach going into the intestines. So it's almost as if like nature knew that our intestines are constantly going to be struggling and needing repair, and it created this peptide which does exactly that. And maybe just as many people's stomachs stop producing enough stomach acid, maybe they stop producing enough BP157, especially if they're lacking the raw ingredients, the question that you asked about earlier, potentially. And so taking BP157, again, it's really a supplemental one, I would say, because maybe your stomach isn't producing enough, or maybe your circumstances mean that you need more than your stomach is able to produce. And so that's BP157 in a nutshell. Also has anti-inflammatory effects, all the rest of it, but especially for healing. There is an oral version that's sold, but again, most people would say the injectable version is significantly more impactful. But there are some people actually selling the oral version. And sometimes they sell it with the TB500 and call it like a gut repair, gut regeneration formula. I did not have massively noticeable impact from that. But then again, my digestion is way better than it was. It's hard to place it again because there's that delayed respect when it comes to healing. It's a little bit tricky to say. The other thing for healing and recovery and repair, which we talked about before, is the growth hormone peptide. So generally, the recommendation is you have one growth hormone releasing peptide, one growth hormone releasing hormone. If you take them together, they have a lot more impact than taking them separately. Now, at this stage, I could spend ages listing all the benefit of each peptide, but I actually just want to shout out, there's one great resource for this by a guy called Dr. William Seeds, and it's called Peptide Protocols Volume 1. As far as I know, there is no Volume 2. If you found one, let me know. I'd love to hear about it. Put it in the comments on YouTube. Dr. Seeds, he had his own company. I think he was actually selling BPC 157 and TB 500 in oral form, and then he just kind of disappeared, or that company disappeared. I don't know what happened. Who knows? Business is not always easy. But he's still the head of a peptide foundation, which is a bunch of medical doctors, throughout the world that meet regularly to talk about peptides and what they can do for medicine. And so I don't, as I said, I'm not a doctor. I'm not giving recommendations here about how much you should take or when, what time of day, all that kind of stuff. I would say you can just go to Dr. Seed's book for that. It's available on Amazon. It's cheap. It's a great resource. And then, of course, that's only if you're insisting on doing it yourself. Much better to go to a professional, because he's only giving general ideas. And I guess the only reason he can get away with it is because the book is written for doctors, not for people like me and you, even though it's very easy to read. So, always better to seek that professional advice, because there could be 1,000,001 reasons why you shouldn't be taking something. On the subject of growth hormone, the most startlingly, massively obvious reason why you don't want to take growth hormone of any kind is if growth hormone stimulating peptides of any kind is if you have any kind of cancer or tumor, because growth hormone makes everything grow. And if you've already got a problem with a growth, it not only can, but probably will make it worse. So this is something to be very cautious about. Now, as we said, are most of the athletes, if they can get away with it, on it because it helps with recovery so much? Absolutely. Most of the celebrities and the models and all the people who need to look good on it because it helps you to lose fat while keeping muscle or gaining muscle? Absolutely. Right. So it's actually used quite ubiquitously among, those who are in the performance industries, I would say. But still, it can create a problem that is significant. So this is something to be aware of. And again, the growth hormone releasing peptide and hormones are tend to be synthetic. So they're not naturally occurring in the body. And so they're more likely to create that immune system response. If you're going to ignore all my advice and do them anyway, I would say this is one of the ways that I could tell. I first came across this through a teacher, I can't remember his name, Kent, I think, who said that when he first started taking them, he would get an immune system reaction, like it would go all red. And then after a while, that would stop happening. And that was a sign that his immune system would stop reacting to things. And I would say that is the exact thing that happened to me. It's not just that my body got used to it, because my body just stopped reacting to things as much in general, like foods that used to bother me, chemicals in the environment, like allergens, all of it. My body just stopped responding to any of it anywhere near as much. So, but that's like a fun example, I guess, that the immune system goes, oh, okay, even though this is not an endogenous peptide, it's no big deal. We don't have to throw a massive inflammation fit. It's just a signal. It's just a biochemical signal, and we'll just send it to the right place, and that's that, rather than like overreacting to it massively. The other thing that's really good for injuries is GHK, but in fact, I'll go into that one next. So GHK-Cu is, so Cu is the elemental, the Latin abbreviation for copper, so often called GHK copper. So this is GHK is basically 3 amino acids, GHK. I think it's is it glycine or glutamine, histidine, and can't remember the other one, and plus copper. And there is a version without copper, but it's the one with copper that you really want. So what is it? It seems to do almost everything, but it's especially good for cellular repair. Now, cells not repairing sufficiently is one of the theories as to what causes aging and what causes premature aging. So this is a really big deal. It also has been indicated to help with DNA repair. And again, DNA not replicating properly, not repairing properly is seen as one of the causes of aging, one of the causes of premature aging. So again, it's a really big deal. So yeah, copper peptide. And then, but the reason why most people use it is neither of those things, because they're a bit hard to tell. It's because it helps with the skin. So it helps particularly with the skin, collagen, all the rest of it. And it is the only peptide that arguably works better transdermal. So GHK-ACU is usually sold transdermal. It's usually sold as part of some kind of skin product. Although you can get the pure version. You can inject it. I tried it once. I had a really bad response. Maybe that's just me. But I think hardly anyone bothers because it actually works really well on the skin. So most people are using the skin to look younger. It gives a kind of glow and all the rest of it. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting one. There's also a theory about that. So if we look at anti-aging, talking about growth hormone, this is something where this is still massively contested, but it was speculated that one of the reasons we age is because of growth hormone deficiency, simply because when they looked at how much growth hormone someone has at the age of 20, 30, 40, 50, it kind of massively goes down. It actually goes down even more than some of the sex hormones and stuff. It's like downhill. Well, this is also the case for GHK copper. So if you take the blood of a 20-year-old and the blood of a 40-year-old, even 40, right, let alone 60, the GHK is massively reduced. And by a factor of 3, something like that. So say from 60 to 20, I can't remember the exact figures, but significantly lower. And so there's a lot of speculation that actually GHK is one of the key things that keeps us at least looking young, and possibly even young on a more deeper, more profound level. And so this is also interesting to me because thinking about the myths, like people like Lady Bathory who used to bathe in virgin's blood, or people would bathe in the blood of animals and stuff like that, or rub the blood of animals on themselves. I know this is kind of gross, so I'm not advising to do that, but I'm speculating, I wonder if one of the reasons people did that is because they would then absorb the high youthful levels of GHK copper through their skin from that blood from that youthful victim. And so I say that not to recommend that anyone does that, but to say, look, you don't have to do that these days, right? We can synthesize it now in a lab. So
yes, please.
Stop using
not recommended.
youthful
Thank
virgin
you so
blood.
much.
I just wonder, I don't know. Bathory is a famous one, but there are all these stories about ancient aristocrats and all the rest of it. And that's where the Dracula myth came from as well. So I wonder if, all along, if you'd have just gone back to these people and gone, here's some GHK copper in a bottle. So you'd have to kill anyone. Leave them alone. Who knows?
And when you do make me laugh.
So yeah, next one, talking about looking good. Probably the most used peptide of all, other than insulin, obviously, but more on the black market, the people doing it for themselves, is melanotan. Especially melanotan 2. And as the name implies, melanotan makes you tanned. That's why people are into it. There's kind of, you could look it up, there's news stories of people who, almost seem to change their race. They overdo it so much. And of course, that is a bad idea and dangerous. If you take too much melanotan, you can stimulate too much melanin, and that can lead to melanomas and skin cancer and stuff like that. So that's a bad idea. However, that's getting a bit ahead of myself. What is it? So the thing that actually makes us tan is this thing called melanin, right? And so the amount of melanin we have is controlled by this thing called alpha MSH, melanocyte stimulating hormone. And so this is created in the pituitary. It's related to the stress chemical ACTH. Anyway, it's not one of the well-known ones. We didn't cover it in the hormone episode because it seems to have a bunch of effects that are kind of not really related to each other. But it's interesting. It's often called the Barbie doll peptide. And that's because some of the most interesting impacts of melanotan is it makes you more tanned, increases your sex drive, it reduces your hunger, and it also helps to reduce inflammation. Those are like the main things that it's famous for. So, I guess the idea is it makes you tan, skinny, and always up for sex, right? It's the idea. Does it actually do that? No, but wherever you're at, it will move you closer to being that. Let's at least say that if you use it, and especially if you use a lot of it. So I personally am not a fan of this because of the skin cancer risks, but it absolutely does work. And if you're sensible about it, so if you take melanotan, it tans you it tans you a bit even if you have no contact with sun. But what it really does is it means that if you have just a little bit of contact with sun, it will tan you way more. So if you use it, usually if you go away for a week, you're not going to get a really deep tan. If you go away for a week in the sun, you're not going to get a really deep tan, right? You're probably going to get burned or, a tan that fades after a couple of weeks. But if you were to use melanotan, say, every day along with being in the sun, it would give you that really deep tan, which would last for a long time. And if you can only occasionally get out in the sun because you're usually working during the day or whatever, right? It's the way of maximizing the tanning power of a short amount of sun time. Now, in terms of the other benefits, so I'm not a big fan of that. The thing that I actually don't like is the reducing appetite. I found it really reduced my appetite, made me nauseous. I didn't like it. So I personally wouldn't use it. But if you're someone who wants to reduce your appetite and if you use it in moderation, obviously, especially with a physician overseeing it, it could be great. The other thing I didn't like about it is it is related to that stimulating hormone. So for those who are a bit understimulated in life, I think it could actually be good. But for those of us who run high on cortisol like me, it didn't work. It just made me more stimulated. I didn't like it. So, but again, these are personal. As I said, I'm just going to share my personal experience. For those who want some of those benefits without all of them, for instance, people who are not interested in tanning, there are fragments available, just like there are fragments we talked about earlier of TB4. And so the most well-known ones are KPV. So KPV is just 3 amino acids in a row, and that's like the anti-inflammatory bit of the melanotan peptide. So that basically just reduces inflammation. But probably of more interest to more people is PT141. And PT141 is actually licensed as a drug in the United States by the FDA as a treatment for is it hypogyno syndrome, something like that? Basically, the way that these days they turn everything into a disease in order to justify having a drug for it. So women with low sex drive, they've now decided that is a disease. And because it's a disease, they can license a drug. And that drug is this. So it helps to increase sex drive, really in men and women, but especially in women. Not being anywhere near as popular as Viagra, because it has that same limitation that a lot of peptides do, which is you have to inject it. So a lot of people are not keen on that. But, some people are absolutely willing to do it if it gives them the result that they want. And I'm sure they're still making a lot of money. Next category, DSIP, DSIP, deep sleep inducing peptides. The name is really on the tin with that one. Although it has loads of other benefits with hormonal health and glutathione production and antioxidants and all kinds of interesting stuff. But again, usually basically used by people who want to increase their deep sleep. Why would you want to increase your deep sleep? Because you're not waking up feeling rested is an obvious answer. But a lot of people these days are actually tracking their sleep with various kind of apps, and they can see how little deep sleep they're getting. And so if you are tracking that app, a lot of people have found, or one of those apps, a lot of people have found that when you take DSIP, you actually feel like your sleep isn't that restful. I hear that from a lot of people. They're like, I seem to wake up in the night more than before. But when they actually look at the app, they go, oh, damn, but I've actually got twice as much deep sleep as I usually do, or whatever, right? So it does seem to work. Very interesting. Some people say it works better in the morning, even though it's deep sleep inducing, all that stuff. You need to work that out with your doctor. Dosages also vary widely, what's effective for you. So that's definitely one, as with all of them, that medical supervision would be a good idea for. There's metabolism mitochondrial boosters. So we talked a lot about metabolism in the last episode when we talked about weight loss. So I won't get into that aspect of it again. Check out that episode. I'll talk more about metabolism in terms of energy and just for every cell in your body having the energy it needs to do everything that it needs to do properly. Because if it doesn't, that's actually yet another theory about the cause of aging and premature aging is a lack of mitochondrial health, that your little energy factories in your cells are not able to produce enough energy, or they're struggling to produce energy. And so these peptides are relevant for that. So there's MOTS-c. When I first saw that, I saw it advertised as like exercise in a bottle. I think that's pushing it a little bit. But the other thing is, like, if you take the dose that would require that would meet up to that claim, if it's true at all, it's like $50 a day or something like that. So this is outside the range of what most people are really able to do. I personally have found in much lower, more affordable doses on a regular basis, it helps with energy production. I feel good on it. It seems to have a similar effect to me as PQQ, which is a supplement, which also is good for energy production. There's also humanin, which I've not had much experience with, but that's similar. It's supposed to improve mitochondrial energy production. And I put a couple of non-peptides in this category because I think it's so important. So there's 5-amino MQ, which is not a peptide, but is always sold alongside peptides. So, you'd find it in the same place if you're already shopping there, as it were. And this is a thing that, again, basically speeds up metabolism, really popular with athletes, popular with bodybuilders, popular with people who want to lose weight, even though, don't expect anything dramatic there without diet and exercise, but it can, help a little bit. Even popular with those who want to gain muscle, but especially, again, energy. We're talking about a bunch of people who want a lot of energy to do a lot of stuff. So it's a really great energy supplement. Yeah, I think I'd class it as a supplement. And then methylene blue. Methylene blue is really interesting. I'd say it is the best thing of all to support mitochondrial energy production. It's fascinating. It's technically a drug, so you can only buy it, again, as a research chemical. Like with most of these, I don't think a doctor would prescribe it to you. But there's a great book which really goes in great detail about why it works, how it works, and all the rest of it. So I will not go into it. I'll just refer you to that. We'll include that in the links in the description. Brain support. So there's a bunch that are supposed to support the brain. The only ones that I've really found to be great are Cmax and C-Lank. These come from Russia, so they're not in the bioregulator class, but they were developed in Russia. Similar kind of thing, helping with peak performance, I think with athletes, if I remember correctly. So Cmax and C-Lank are in some way similar. They're certainly similar in terms of how you take them. With both of them, they actually work best as intranasal sprays. So for that reason, they're quite a good, first peptide to try, because you don't have to inject them for you to get the most out of them. They're also fairly cost effective. They're really quite cheap. So Cmax is the stimulating one, and C-Lank is the calming one in a nutshell. So you might want to do Cmax in the morning, C-Lank in the evening. Both of them are fantastic at helping the brain function better, interestingly, even though one is stimulating and one of them is relaxing. There's research showing that it helps stimulate BDNF and NGF, so basically things that help your brain cells to grow, for you to grow more brain cells, increases neuroplasticity. So yeah, loads of different benefits to help cognition. And I would say immediately noticeable. The other brain peptides that I have come across and tried really don't seem to do anything. Maybe they do long term, but Cmax, you should immediately feel, I feel clearer if you're already feeling a little bit foggy. And ditto C-Lank, you should immediately feel a bit clearer and a bit more relaxed. And then the last one, and I would say this would be the most popular category of all if they really worked well, but unfortunately they don't work as well, some of these others, but it's weight loss. So we already talked about that in the weight loss episode. We talked about growth hormone, oxytocin, semaglutide. I won't go over those again. There is another one called AOD 9604, which stands for anti-obesity drug. That there's some kind of indications. I would say none of these are going to make you lose 50 pounds, but there is research that shows, well, none of them except for semaglutide, which I talked about last time, could help you lose a lot of weight, but has some significant side effects I don't feel are worth it. So AOD is more like a marginal difference because it's not going to massively change the amount that you eat, which is how semaglutide actually works, by massively reducing your appetite. But it may well be worth looking at, and it's not exorbitantly expensive, unlike the MOTS-C that I talked about earlier. Some people say it's really worked for them. But again, the people who I see saying it really works are people who exercise a lot, and maybe they're just getting older and they can't get rid of some stubborn fat, and then it works. But if you're, 300 pounds and you want to lose 100 pounds, it's not going to do it. You need to do more of the stuff we talked about in the last episode.
What a list.
And it's only a start. This is only from my personal experience, some of my areas of interest. There is so much more. I mean, as Dr. Seeds talks about in his books, there's the whole issue of cell senescence, which is one of the other theories as to aging, and there are peptides that help with that, but they tend to be really expensive, and it's hard to test if it's even working. So that's why I haven't got into that. In case, a lot of people read the book because I recommend it and go, why didn't you mention that? That's basically why.
No, that's really good. Thank you. Especially this is a very big topic, a new topic to me. What are some of the misconceptions about peptides that are out there?
So, it's a misconception to say that they're totally safe in many cases, as we talked about, but it's also a misconception to say that they're totally dangerous. As we talked about, the bioregulator ones are pretty much safe no matter what. Even with a lot of the supplemental ones, so long as you are not silly with the dosing, which is usually the issue, right? It's like with the melanotan, the people who are way overdoing it and then getting skin cancer. And so long as you are careful with the sourcing, generally, in most cases, they're reasonably safe. But the biggest misconception that I see is because they actually work, often so noticeably and so quickly, it's very easy to get into a mentality of they're the be-all and end-all, right? And also because they're new and trendy and all the rest of it. They're not, right? They are helpful, but, if you're smoking cigarettes and never get up off the sofa and, spend all day watching TV, right? This is not going to, revolutionize your life. So, this is my system, which I'm sure we'll get into eventually, but just when I want to help people, I always run, for them through 7 filters first, right? Nutrition. What are you eating? What are you missing more commonly? Toxicity. What is your body struggling to deal with or get rid of? Genetic factors. We talk about that in every episode. Lifestyle factors, right? Amount of sleep you're getting, amount of stress you're getting, amount of exercise you're getting, all that good stuff, amount of light you're getting. Hormones. We talked about that. Pathogens and emotional factors. And so if you haven't addressed those core tenets of health, those core principles, if there are major holes in that area, and I gave the silly examples, but not that silly, right? I was amazed. I was at a event. I'll say who it was. It was Joe Dispenza, right? His week-long advanced workshop thing with a bunch. And, most people there are people who want to heal and get better through meditation. And, often they're quite, I'd say, rational people because Joe Dispenza does a lot of scientific research to kind of prove what he's doing compared to, the average meditation teacher. And I'm not judging these people, but I was just curious to observe how many people in the breaks would go outside and smoke. Let alone the amount of people who go to coffee stores and, drink coffee with sugar. And again, I'm not judging because I know we all do what we have to kind of get through this life and to feel good. But it's just an example of first principles. I would be, and again, you could say that doing those meditations is a way to overcome those addictions, and that's great. But don't forget about the first principles. That's the key thing. It's so easy to think peptides are going to do it, meditation's going to do it, this diet's going to do it, whatever it might be. But the approach that really works is the holistic one, by which I mean looking at the big picture, looking at everything, and then working out what is the weakest link? What am I missing here? Now, for some people, that may actually be peptides. That's the example that I gave of, why this is catching a lot with naturopaths and functional medicine doctors and stuff who are trying to help people with really difficult conditions where they react to everything. And so the thing that was missing in that case was peptides, right? Start adding in enough peptides to calm down the immune system, and miracles started happening, right? And suddenly people started to be able to heal and get better. So, but look at all the basics first, especially as peptides, can be troublesome. As we said, a lot of them need to be injected. They can be dangerous. They can be expensive, right? So don't forget about the basic core tenets, I would say. That's the biggest misconception that they're like this exercise in a bottle idea, right? That you can just take this thing. And, maybe you've got a really low sex drive because because you were sexually abused when you were young. And does taking PT141 overcome that? Yes. But does it resolve the core issue? No. And maybe something else will come up instead to, block you still having a healthy, enjoyable sex life. So yeah, always get down to like the root causes, I would say. But sometimes the root causes are the lack of peptides. As I said, this is speculated that this is one of the root causes of premature aging. So if it is the root cause, fantastic, because it's fairly easy to do once you get over, certain factors.
And you touched a little bit right there on my next question was really, what are the dangers of these peptides? I think you've kind of gone through it as we've spoken here, but just a quick recap for everybody.
Wasted money is a big one, right? So we talked about, there is a reason I talked about hormones beforehand. You can go to a doctor and an optimization doctor, as we talked about, and a lot of the time it's thyroid, a lot of the time it's sex hormones, a lot of the time it's adrenal hormones. Getting those things in place first usually costs maybe $100 to $200 a month. That's US prices, usually less in pretty much every other country in the world, right? So that is going to, in most cases, have a bigger impact than any peptide. And I say that as a lover of peptide and a user of many, right? That's like one of the most basic things you can do. And I know I just said everything, but if you're the kind of person who doesn't want to change your lifestyle and you just want a doctor to hand you something, get them to hand you probably hormones before they start handing you peptides, I guess. And then, major side effects are possible, right? Even life-threatening ones, especially quality issues. If you get it from someone unreliable, untrustworthy, contaminated, and all the rest of it. So, those are wasted money and danger of side effects and impurities, I'd say.
And now, because this is definitely a new area, maybe not for some if they've been in it for quite some time, definitely for me, what would you say within the field of peptides? What is the future here with these wonderful little amazing things that can help us so much?
They're so small they can slot into our DNA. Yeah. Well, that's a really interesting question. A lot of the advocates of peptides, use the phrase a lot, the future of medicine. Maybe we'll use that as the episode title unless we think it's something better. And I think there's a couple of reasons for this. So first of all, in many ways, they're better than drugs because they're natural, or even if they're not perfectly natural, they're a replica of something that's natural. So still way more natural than most drugs, right? Now, of course, there's always been that argument that the reason why doctors, only prescribe drugs rather than, looking at things like, say, nutrients, is because drugs can be patented, nutrients can't, right? This is a big distinction. And so the cynics, the conspiracy theorists among us, would say that the reason that, the Western focus is purely on drugs and surgery in to a vast degree, these days also genetic, stuff, but in practice still mainly drugs and surgery, is because, you can patent drugs. And so the interesting thing about peptides is no one would have thought that they were the future of medicine until a few years ago, because no matter how well they work, if they're not patentable because they're already existing in your body, then tough luck, right? You're not going to make much money from them, and therefore it's not going to be the future of medicine. But what changed recently is that they changed the law to be able to classify a peptide as a drug and therefore register it with the FDA and patent it for a specific purpose. And so that's what they did with PT141, for instance, which has some kind of brand name that I don't remember off the top of my head. But they basically said, and actually I didn't mention this, but thymosin alpha-1 also is a patented drug for a specific purpose, which is helping people with HIV. And there's several, and so thymosin alpha-1 already exists naturally inside your body, inside my body. And so they couldn't patent it just as a thing, but they could say, in order to help people with HIV to boost their immune system, this is a drug. And we own the patent of it, and no one else can copy us. And ditto, PT141, in order to help women, they chose women, I guess, because Viagra is already so popular for men, but it really works on both. In order to help women with low sex drive syndrome, whatever they've called it, here is a drug that we've patented. Semaglutide, the weight loss one, right? Again, patented drug. And so because they're able to patent it and make money out of it, and because they work so well, and because even though I said the side effects and the dangers are not nothing, they tend to be way lower than actual drugs that are usually used in medicine. Because of all those factors, it may well be the future of medicine. It may well be that in 10 years' time, your doctor is primarily prescribing you peptides. Now, for the cynics among us, are they going to be diagnosing and prescribing supplemental peptides that you have to keep taking for the rest of your life? Or are they going to be prescribing the bioregulators, which help to regenerate your organs so then you don't need anything anymore? We can speculate about that, right? I suspect it will be the supplemental ones. And sure enough, they are the ones that caught on more in the West. Now, do I blame the big corporations and the medical establishment entirely for that? No. Partly it's our own fault because we want the quick fix, right? We want the quick fix. We don't want to wait for months or years before something gets resolved. We want to feel better straight away. And so it's also us, we're also partly to blame because we want that quick fix. As I said, it's much more compelling to, do PT141 if you have low sex drive rather than take, testogen, or I can't remember the female equivalent, but, the thing that rebuilds your own sex organs. It's much more compelling to take the thing that makes you feel it now rather than to take the stuff for a year or whatever it takes to regenerate the glands in order for you to do it yourself, for most people, right? So are bioregulators going to be the future of medicine in the Western world? Probably not, unless the profit motive is removed from Western medicine. But I feel like the supplemental ones may well become the future of medicine, and I hope so, because they are very effective, they are way safer, and I hope that research goes into it. I mean, that's the good thing about patenting, right? The bad thing, as we talked about, is that all the good things that would help you, like lifestyle and nutrition, don't get recommended because you can't patent it. But the good thing about it is that loads of research is done into it and loads of testing and double-blind trials and proving it works and safety and comparing it to other things and all the rest of it. So I'm kind of happy about that patenting thing in a way, even though it means they'll jack up the prices a bit, because you can still get generic versions of it, right? Once the patents run out. And it means that they'll have actually done all the research to show that it works, how it works, what it's good for, what it's not, all the rest of it. So I'm kind of, I'm not totally against that.
Yeah, as long as they keep the price, reasonably affordable.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, so thymosin alpha 1, I believe that the price of that is like over $1,000 a month for HIV patients if it is a prescribed drug. Whereas if you get even if you get it from a doctor, but from a compounding pharmacy, it's a lot less. So yeah, they probably will jack out the price. But so long as they still allow us to get our generic versions, I guess that's the best we can hope for.
Yeah, well, we'll keep that, hold that space for it. So then that brings me to this question. You've said, you've gone quite deeply into this topic. There's a lot of peptides that you have dallied with and many that you do take. But if you could only choose 3, which 3 would they be and why?
Okay, so ended with a fun question. This is a hard one for me. I did have to think about this because I actually enjoy quite a few of them. And again, I follow my own advice. I don't put them over lifestyle and nutrition and all the rest of it. But hey, I'm an enthusiast for all this stuff, right? So I'm really into a bunch of them. But yeah, narrowing it down, and I'm not saying this is the best things for you, Krissy, or anyone watching, but just for me, I really like oxytocin for reasons I've talked about before. I run low in it personally, or more specifically, I run high on cortisol. So the oxytocin really helps to balance that. It's helped my digestion, it's helped my mood, it's helped my psychological issues, I think, to some degree. It's helped my weight. I've always been underweight. Like, this is literally the first time in my life I've not been underweight by a BMI scale. And I love the way it makes me feel, but it's not addictive. I can happily skip it without an issue. It's also not down-regulating in the sense that you have to keep using more and more to get the same effect. It seems like you can just keep using the same amount and it has the same effect. And it's safe. So oxytocin, actually, I'll just mention it in the context of what we talked about earlier. It's the only anabolic compound that seems to not grow tumors and cancer. So we talked about growth hormone. If it's increased, will potentially increase tumors and cancer. Testosterone used to be thought it could increase tumors and cancer. That's generally less in favor now as a theory. But then a lot of women especially don't want to take testosterone. I'm already over my limit of testosterone, so I don't want to have more testosterone. So there's plenty of people who don't want to have more testosterone for whatever reason. So it's good in that regard. And then, estrogen is anabolic, but it also, definitely can lead to cancer increase. So yeah, to be able to have something that, leads to muscle growth, weight loss, doesn't grow cancer, doesn't grow tumors, doesn't grow anything bad in your body, has no side effects, doesn't downregulate. I love oxytocin. Again, if you know something that is bad about it, I'm all ears, right? Put it in the comments underneath. Thymosin alpha-1 and thymosin beta-4 would be the other ones. Like for me, one of the big issues for me was my immune system being completely out of whack, being, way too inflammatory, being way too allergic, intolerant to all kinds of stuff. And also having these chronic pathogenic infections going on years and decades. So they've been miraculous for me. And, thymosin beta-4 for me, because I am still processing lead in my body, getting it out of my bloodstream. It's gone down massively quicker than you'd expect, but it's still, a process. So we keep taking it for that reason and to reduce inflammation. And yeah, I just feel so strong. I mean, I haven't had COVID once, Is that a coincidence? Maybe. But everyone I know seems to have had it again and again. So, despite having these chronic health issues, now I say that, I'm probably going to get COVID within a week, right? After declaring it.
No, don't worry. I haven't had it either, so we're in the same boat. We're good.
Okay. No, you're going to get it week too. No. But yeah, those are kind of acute illnesses. I'm very, very happy to have thymosin alpha-1 available to help me prevent them, in my view. Let's just put it that way. I hope that's not. I hope that's something that I'm allowed to say.
Yeah, we'll find out. With also, this is something else that popped up into my mind because I'm always, wanting to take a look, and maybe you have this answer, maybe you don't, but hopefully you do. Could somebody test to see whether they are low in peptides, or what would that look like?
Yeah, I wish I could. None of the ones that we've talked about, I think. Obviously, insulin, you can. But yeah, not easily. These are not, can you, in theory, if you have access to, like a friendly biochemist who, could do you a favor or something?
Go to your friendly biochemist and they'll help you out.
But these are not commonly ordered tests by doctors either. I don't believe, again, put it in the comments if you know of any exceptions to this, but I don't believe any medical doctors test any of these peptides before they prescribe them. I think they're always based on symptoms, right? Symptomologies and based on that. There's one exception to that actually, which is IGF-1. So you can absolutely test for IGF-1, and you should test for IGF-1 if you're taking any of the growth hormone peptides. So IGF-1, so IGF stands for insulin-like growth factor. It's basically taking growth hormone. The only reason you take growth hormone is because it makes IGF-1. So that's the actual thing that has the effect of the healing and the growth and repair of tissues and all the rest of it. And so you can definitely have too little of that, but you can also have too much. So a lot of it's actually not easily available in the UK, but in America, most of the testing companies do offer that, often as part of like a longevity package, because there are a lot of people, especially in America, I guess, taking growth hormone or growth hormone stimulating peptides. And so it's good to keep an eye on your IGF-1 to make sure it is not becoming excessive for all the reasons we talked about. Other than that, just going for the list, I don't think there's any others that you can actually test for easily. No.
Well, thank you. Maybe in the future, it could be something that does get developed or that does come along. This has been hugely...
I would love that. And of course,
it would be great.
If it is going to be the future of medicine, it needs to. The thing about lab testing, of course, is it's all based on demand, and demand is largely based on what doctors are routinely ordering. So if the people predicting that, and I'm tentatively predicting it, I'm not as convinced as some people, but if the people predicting that are right, then absolutely, doctors love to test before they give you anything. In fact, that's often where the cynics and critics would say that's where there's actually an issue, because sometimes they should be prescribing more based on symptoms rather than lab tests. But if it does become popular, there absolutely will be lab tests for this stuff. And I look forward to the day that I can, test my levels of thymosin alpha 1 or BPC 157. That'd be great.
Well, again, thank you. Like I said, it's hugely informative on this, emerging topic of peptides, and really looking forward to delving deeper into it. But I just want to say thank you, Elwin. Thank you for always, being the person not willing to take "there's nothing we can do" for an answer, because I know that strives you and brings all this information to us. So thanks again. And thank you everyone so much for staying with us and for sharing your time with us. And just remember, if you like what you're listening to, then please remember to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss another episode. And we'll see you again next time. I hope you enjoyed that episode. And if you did, I want to tell you about a way that you can support the podcast while also getting great deals on high quality supplements that Elwin and I personally use. And that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is that they have great quality products with minimal fillers at a very affordable price. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week. And in my experience, they're very helpful and friendly. And the thing I love most of all is the amazing descriptions that Elwin has written about each product category on that topic. And each product has so much education on it that I've actually learned more from reading the descriptions than I have from a lot of articles. So to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, use promo code RejuvenateMe for 20% off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order using promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net.